Welcome everybody to our next session in which I will be interviewing the famous, wonderful, the Knight Indestructible Stan Sakai, the creator of Usagi Yojimbo, the Samurai Rabbit comic. And we are here currently at the House of Books in southwestern Finland, in the city of Turku, the oldest city of Finland, and I am Juhani Gradistanac, the comics person of Turku Comics Club. The Turku Comics Club has been established already in 1974, so we have several decades of comics hobby enthusiasts club formation behind us, and but this is the first time we actually collecting material to hold a virtual conference in a larger scale. Previously, the Turku Comics Club has been holding Finland's smallest comics convention, that is Necronomicon, every November in the bleak darkness, subarctic darkness of southern Finland. But now we are aiming to loftier heights and are planning, we are holding the Turku Comics Festival, which unfortunately this first time has to be held over the internet as a virtual conference. Hopefully in the future we will have an actual meeting place for all comics fans in Finland. And now I will be introducing Mr. Stan Sakai, as promised, the creator of Usagi Yojimbo comic.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you, Johanna.
Yes, and you too. And you are indeed, you have been working with Usagi Yojimbo comic for over 25 years now, is it?
Oh, actually, this will be my 37th year of doing Usagi Yojimbo, at least in the United States.
Yes, and Usagi has only recently last year started its Finnish publication to the adoration of Finnish public. And in a few weeks, there will be the second collection of Usagi stories will be published. So now at last, after this long wait, at least since my teenage days, which are long past now, we will finally be able to enjoy Usagi in our Finnish language too.
Wonderful.
Yes, and okay. I was wondering about the origins of Usagi as a comic character and as a comic. I understand that since early age you have been interested about samurai history and samurai mythology. Is that true?
It's very true. I'm a third generation Japanese American, and I grew up in Hawaii. Just down the street from me was an old Japanese movie theater, and it would show chambara, or Japanese fighting movies, every Saturday. And I love those. I was there just about every Saturday. So I saw first run movies of Toshiro Mifune and so many others. And I grew up with that. And my mother was a first generation Japanese. So she told me a lot of the history, about the culture and the mythology of Japan. So I grew up with all of that. And Hawaii, especially at that time, had a huge Japanese population. So I grew up with the festivals, the tradition and the culture of Japan. And when I wanted to do a comic book, at first I wanted to do superheroes, but then I was thinking about it a bit, and I wanted to do something about the samurai culture, especially about one of my favorite movies or books, the life story of Miyamoto Musashi. He was a samurai that lived in the early 17th century, and he is regarded as what the epitome of what the true samurai should be. And I wanted to do a story about him, or a story inspired by his life. But one day, while just sketching in my sketchbook, I drew a rabbit with his ears tied up into what's called a chonmage, a samurai top knot. And it was a simple drawing, but it was unique. No one had ever done it before, and I love the simple design. So instead of using humans, I changed it to my lead character to an animal and named him Miyamoto Usagi. Usagi means rabbit in Japanese. So from Miyamoto Musashi, I got Miyamoto Usagi. And this was back in the very early 1980s. And Usagi was first published in 1984. And I'm still doing them until today.
So that was the early creation of Usagi as a character. But you mentioned those samurai movies and fighting movies you watch as a child and a teenager. Were you especially influenced by some specific movies or anything? I've heard it mentioned that one of your favorite movies is Satomi Hakkenden, which is based on a 19th century adventure fantasy samurai novels. Is that true?
Yes. They would show that a 3-part version of Satomi Hakkenden, and they show it every year. And every year I wait to see it again in the movie theaters. Now, this is before the time of videos or anything. You had to watch it first run in the theaters. So whenever it came on the theater, I would line up to see it. Both Satomi Hakkenden's, one of my favorite movies, the films of Kira Kurosawa, C7 Samurai, Yojimbo, Sanjuro. His movies are great. And a lot of my storytelling techniques are from movies or cinema. And I used to love them, just watching them. And I like to follow directors because I like how certain movie directors handle certain scenes or have certain styles. And I love that. So much of my storytelling is based upon movies.
That certainly shows. What I've noted reading Usagi for many years now is exactly the cinematic visual style of yours. And there are some scenes which I can really imagine the sounds of the scene, wind blowing in the background, flute playing, so on, like in Akira Kurosawa movies and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think that really shows. So you picked up the visual style from there, but also have you picked up specific storytelling styles or themes from movies or elsewhere? I've noted that Usagi is both very accurate historical, almost documentary-like storytelling, but also it contains lots of fancy elements, folklore from Japanese folk tales and so on. So and classical stories and so. So can you mention any other influences besides movies that have influenced the development of Usagi?
My mother was a huge influence in that she used to read to me the works of Osamu Tezuka, who is regarded as the god of manga in Japan, manga no kami-sama. And even before manga became popular, even before I heard the term manga, I used to look at Japanese comics. And so that was a huge influence. Just American comics was also a huge influence. It wasn't until much later, when I was going to college, that I discovered European comics and the works of Mobius and Herman, or so many others. And that opened up my eyes. So I have influence from all over. I also like to read. I read a lot, mainly novels. I love mysteries, detective novels. And some of my characters have been adapted from a lot of the books that I've read. And it's ideas come up from all over. It used to be that when I was doing, say, stories about yokai, the haunts and monsters of Japanese mythology, my first reference would be to go to my mother, because she used to tell me stories about the obake, the ghosts of Japan and monsters of Japan. And when I had a question about it, the first person I asked would be my mother.
That certainly shows that you have lots of influences. There are one of the big strengths of Usagi as a comic, I think, is that it adapts to different genres. There are adventure stories and fantasy, supernatural horror and detective stories, and I'm sure that the Finnish readership and at large, they will very much enjoy those when the story progresses in translation to that level.
Well, unlike most American comics, I own my character and I own my stories. I write and draw everything myself. So I can write any type of stories I want. I've done mysteries, I've done love stories, I've done an almost silent story of just taking you through the Japanese traditional tea ceremony. I've also had a story arc where the Martians invade feudal Japan. And, that's the neat thing, the wonderful thing about what I do is that I'm really blessed in that I own my character. I can do whatever I want with him. So that's very rare in American comics. And my editors and my publisher don't see anything of the story until I turn it in and it's completely finished. So they have pretty much no influence as far as the editorial direction or the story direction of my stories.
So you have a complete creative control. That I think is certainly a very positive thing, and it can. It really shows.
I believe that I've earned that right after so many years, and I've received a number of awards for storytelling and art and everything, and so after a while, I feel that I've earned the right to be pretty much autonomous, and that I can do whatever I want, and the editors have learned to trust me as far as the story and art goes.
Absolutely. I'm sure that you are glad to hear in that regard that the translation of your work, Usagi, by Vesa Heino is also sort of a one-man job. He's basically done all the work by himself, except the actual publishing, of course. But he approached himself, you by himself, as you probably remember, in Helsinki Comic Convention a few years ago, and then started thinking about this project and proposing it to a small local publisher and so on. And I'm glad to say that I'm very proud about the small help that our comics club could give to Vesa during his translation. We could provide him with a space and the means to work on the translation for a full year here at our offices, and that certainly shows that he has had the creative freedom in translating the text also. So that really, I think that it gives more value to your work, and I think that you, of course, unfortunately can't read the Finnish translation, but it follows very well the themes and the spirit of your original work.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you.
Yes, well, as I was aiming to ask you about the characters in Usagi, there's a huge cast of characters. For instance, of course, because the series is so long and there's different kinds of stories. But how do you approach the character development? There are many characters who start as small ones and then they start recurring and then grow into bigger roles. How does that happen? Can you describe that development of the characters?
Sometimes I create characters that I know will be a recurring character. That means they'll be showing up every so often, again and again. Other characters, I would think that it's only created for this one story. However, I fall in love with him or that character. And I get letters or emails or saying that we love to see this character, more of this character, the background of this character. And so I think, it's really popular. And I'll think I can have a nice background or nice history about that character. And that's happened like with the, I guess it's further on down the line. There's the priest named Sanshobo. And he was just going to appear in one very short story. But then reader reaction and my reaction, I like that character. Just the design of the character, and then I gave him a backstory and I fleshed him into a real person. And sometimes it just works out that way. Other times there's some characters that I think I'm going to use this character again and again, but then it just doesn't work. So I may have to change the character, redesign the character, or just eliminate them completely. So I approach it very different ways. Again, because I own the entire series, I can do that.
What about Usagi himself? Now, of course, he's the central character, and these days long-time readers know a lot more about him than earlier. His childhood has been fleshed up, and there are many phases in his life being told about and told about as afterwards and so on. But how do you think that Usagi has developed as a character? You mentioned that he's partly based on Miyamoto Musashi, the famous swordman, but of course the historical Miyamoto Musashi wasn't always that nice person, especially in his younger days. He developed a more philosophical trait in his when he grew older. But what about Usagi? How do you see his character developing during the years?
Well, just as the original Musashi had changed throughout his life, my Usagi has also changed. At first, he was very impulsive, very, he would act without thinking. Now, present day, he's a lot more philosophical. He's a lot more intellectual, and he'll think and he'll reason a lot more than in his early days. And his personality has changed that way. And his physical development has changed. And it's mainly unconscious on my part. It's just as I've got to know him, drawing him, I'm more used to him. So I'll make slight changes, but it's unconscious on my part. Suddenly people have told me, oh, I noticed you started drawing a little bump on his nose. And really? So yeah, you're right. It's like, it never occurred to me that I was doing that, but yeah, it just seemed more natural. So Usagi has changed a lot, both in personality and as far as the character design goes. He's much taller than he originally was when he first appeared. Not taller, but his proportions have changed. He used to be where he was about 3 or 4 heads high. Now he's more like 5 heads, and it's again unconscious on my part.
I tended to notice that, and sort of I've also thought that maybe Usagi starts to look a bit older in the later series.
As I've gotten older, yes. So as
yes, well, of course, and I think that is something that happens to all long-time comic authors when they have characters who they work with together for years or decades. Also, there are many characters. I've heard that not all the characters in Usagi are not Japanese. I don't want to spoil anything for readers who haven't yet read those, but I've heard that there will be characters outside Japan. So from that, I'd like to know that if you developed a Finnish character for the Usagi comic, what animal would a Finnish character be?
Oh. I never thought about a Finnish character. I don't know. I'd love to do. I think when I was in Finland, I saw a hedgehog, and maybe I'd never seen one in the wild before. Maybe a hedgehog, because I've always loved that animal, but that was the only time I've ever seen one, walking along the road, and it was.
A hedgehog would be nice, even though they are supposedly not. They haven't been. In the Finnish nature for too long, like a few centuries. Really? They were supposedly brought from outside Finland, from Germany at I think, when was it, 17th century or something like that, but I'm not entirely sure about that actually, because I think that Finnish mythology mentions them way back earlier. But a hedgehog would be there. There is actually a Finnish comic character, the swearing hedgehog, created by Milla Palm, who is a comic strip character from Daily News.
Maybe you can suggest a character, and if I ever do a Finnish traveler to Japan, I can use that character. What's a good character? Finland.
maybe lynx probably would be suitable
A
for
lynx?
samurai comics. Yeah, I'd say so, or a squirrel perhaps.
Squirrel?
Reindeer would of course be like the Arctic character, but I think that's a bit overdone. It's something more mammalian, perhaps. I don't know. I can. Of course, comics give this great liberty of speculating on characters like that, even though historically it would be a bit off-key to introduce a Finnish character feudal Japan. But then again, it's not impossible. People tended to travel a lot, and there were some surprising human destinies involved, as you probably know. What do you yourself think that there have been several long stories in Usagi also. Which one is your favorite? Your personal favorite long story arc?
There's a story called Grass Cutter, and it's based upon the legend of the grass cutting sword. My story starts off with the creation of the Japanese islands by the gods, and it follows a sword grass cutter after it was found in the tail of an eight-tailed dragon, and it follows it down through history during the Genpei Wars of Japan's 12th century and how it was lost at sea. That story received the Eisner Award, American Library Association Award. It received a number of awards. It was also used in Japanese history classes at the university level and in high school and elementary schools as a reading guide. So that is one of my favorite stories. That story took about 5 years for me to research and to write. And that's one of my, probably the story that I'm most proud of. So Grasscut, I would say.
It is certainly an epic story by any context, and especially in the compared to the other Usagi stories. And I'm glad that you mentioned it, because it contains one of the my favorite Usagi characters. That is the villain, one of the villains of the story. That is Jay.
Jay. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And well, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's certainly an epic story. It's I can't wait to read it in Finnish too. Okay, so we have discussed your characters and the early creation process and the influences and so on. What lies in the future, in your opinion? What lies in the future for the Usagi series?
For the comic book, I'm still working on the comic book. So even today, I was drawing this morning, and I'll continue drawing after this interview is over. Also, there will be a Netflix series that's based on Usagi, though it will not feature Usagi as a main character, but a descendant of Usagi. So that should be appearing on Netflix streaming in about a year, less than a year. Aside from that, I'm just working on the issues now, just the individual stories.
Indeed, and I really hope that there will be many more interesting and epic adventures for Usagi in the future too, for us to read.
Can I go back to the creation of characters again?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, some of my characters, well, most of my characters just created for need. If I want a story about a thief, I'll create a thief. Other times I would come across an actual person from Japanese history and say, oh, that would be a great inspiration for a character, such as Tomoe Ame. My Tomoe Ame was inspired by an actual female samurai named Tomoe Gozen. And she was the consort or a wife of a famous general during the Genpei Wars, Japan's civil wars. And she was renowned for her beauty as well as her skill with the spear. And when her husband, the great lord, was surrounded by the enemy, and it was just the lord and his 5 generals, he ordered Tomoe away from him, not because he wanted to save her life, but because for a samurai, especially in his position, to die with a woman at his side is kind of a disgrace. So he ordered her away, and the legend goes, she jumped on her horse, she attacked the opposing army, cut off the general's head, and went on to become a nun. But that kind of strength and intriguing character became the basis of my tomoe. And stories like that just inspire me. I have a lot of strong female characters, as well as unique male characters. So a lot of characters are from Japanese history or folklore.
I'm very glad that you mentioned your female characters, because that's actually something I was going to ask about. One of the things I really love about Usagi is that how all the characters feel very natural and very real persons, but especially so do your female characters. And it's interesting to know that Tomoe Ame, for instance, is your take on a historical person, and they don't feel contrived. It's the real actors in this world, and this is one of the for me the probably the biggest appeal in Usagi is that all the characters of the place.
I try to give each character a unique personality, so that when two different characters meet, there's conflict there and there's a tension there, and I enjoy that. It's like when Tomoe first met Kitsune the thief, because Kitsune is very, Kitsune means fox, and the fox is very sly, she's cunning, and she takes life as a game, whereas Tomoe is very stoic. She's a real samurai woman.
Yes, she's very responsible and wise.
Yes,
They are completely opposite persons.
Exactly. And I love to do that, where two completely opposite characters would be introduced to each other, and then makes for a great story, or just conflict between characters.
That certainly shows, and you have a real skill in that regard, and building very interesting stories from these small bits and like two opposing characters meeting. I think that shows early on when Usagi first meets Genosuke again, and they don't come along at all, and then they start working together, and then they develop this very loyal friendship also.
Yes, and Gen was inspired by Toshiro Mifune's appearances in a couple of Akira Kurosawa movies. From Yojimbo and from Sanjuro. And I love the visuals of Toshiro Mifune, how he's kind of scruffy and how he's scratching himself, and the way he manipulates people. And so I thought, what a great character. I'd love to make something based upon Mifune's performance in those movies. And that's how Gen came about.
It certainly reminds me and many other readers of Mifune, and one of here's a minor spoiler now, I really can't avoid this. He gets his horn, he's a unicorn. In the comic, he's a rhinoceros, and he gets his horn cut off in a sword fight. So that basically, that's something akin, I think, that a human would get at least part of his nose sliced off. So that makes him even more ugly and more scruffy looking, rougher. But I think that I was talking about this with Vessel some time ago, that as he gets porcelain horn replacing it, but then that too gets lost along their adventures, and why doesn't he get a new one? But then I thought maybe Vesa thought that maybe Gen doesn't care about that kind of thing. Maybe he thinks that it actually made himself look scary and cooler because he doesn't have the horn.
Actually, the main reason his horn got cut off, because if you look at Gen straight on, there's a big horn right in front of his face. And that's very distracting and hard to draw around. So I think I have to cut that horn off, and I did.
Yeah, but actually it gives the cut, him lacking the horn makes him much more characterful. It deepens the character very much. And it's a small detail, but interesting.
When you mentioned about it's like his nose being cut off, and I actually had one character with his nose cut off. There's a character named Zato Ino.
The blind swords pig.
The blind swords pig. Inoshishi means a wild boar. So I thought that was great. Zato Ino was inspired by a movie character named Zato Ichi, the blind swordsman. And in that, in Zato Ichi, he has a great sense of hearing. He can hear people walking towards him. He can hear the swords slicing through the air. With my Zato Ino, because pigs have a great sense of smell, he travels the world with his, he can see with his nose. So he can smell people approaching. He can smell the sword being cut through the air. So when Usagi and Zato Ino first met, Usagi cuts off his nose and thereby really blinding him. But Zato Ino comes back with a wooden nose, a prosthetic nose, and it works just as well, except everything's now pine-scented. So there's characters like that. There's tragic characters, humorous characters, but I try to make each character unique in him or herself.
Certainly. We are drawing close to our allotted time slot limit, but is there anything that you would like to say to your Finnish readers for the ending?
Oh, I've been to Finland before and I love the country, and I'm so glad the Usagi will be published there. So thank you so much. I hope you all enjoy it.
We certainly do, and thank you for giving us this interview. We are very. There's also the club members wish that if you ever have the opportunity, please welcome here to Turku. Also, you have been to Helsinki, but hopefully in the future, when we are able to hold the festival, you are always welcome. Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for this interview.